The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher is produced in the first instance as a radio show, and it's aired on stations around Australia. Due to music licensing restrictions, copyright-protected music tracks in this podcast edition have either been replaced with royalty-free alternatives or removed entirely.
The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Welcome back to the show. It's great to be with you. Clearsignal.com.au is the website. And, of course, shoot me an email anytime you like. The address there is steve@clearsignal.com.au. I'd love to hear from you and get some feedback. You can suggest topics, all that sort of stuff. steve@clearsignal.com.au. Well, look, we've got a couple of great guests coming up on the show this week. A little later on, we're going to be talking about one of my favourite topics. Well, really, I guess it's a happy addiction, really. That's coffee. I mean, who doesn't like coffee? I know I do. I don't think I'd be able to get through a day without it, to be really honest with you. You know, we go to coffee shops and we see all those big fancy espresso machines, those big coffee machines, and I kind of wonder, what does it take to keep them in top condition? We're going to be joined a bit later by a good friend of mine, Darren Eastwood. He's the proprietor of Gippsland Coffee Services, and he's made quite the living, in fact, out of making sure those machines work in tip-top condition. And that's a really great service he does to the community when you really think about it for fellow addicts like me. That's a little later on, but first up, we're going to be talking to another good friend of mine, in fact, someone who's really helped me a lot in the area of radio and someone who's had a long career in this industry. And, that's not something that a lot of people enjoy. It's a very, very tough industry at times, as many of you may know, and that's Tony Moclair. He's the host at the moment on 3AW of their afternoon show, and that's not all he's done. He's done some really, really fun and funny things in his career, so we're going to be talking about that in just a few minutes, but first up, to get us all in the mood, well, let's talk about radio. Here's the sports. Who listens to the radio? Well, I hope you'll listen to the radio.
The Clear Signal.
The sports. And who listens to the radio here on the Clear Signal. And, my next guest is someone who's probably got a bit of a vested interest in people listening to the radio. He's had a long and storied career in an industry that's often known to be quite brutal. And he started off in community radio. He's moved through the FM stations, and recently on Melbourne's talk radio station 3AW has just taken over the afternoon slot. Tony Moclair, welcome to the show.
You're a good man, Steve. It's great to be here.
Well, first off, mate, congratulations on getting the coveted afternoon gig. That must be a big change after doing, 7 years on the overnights?
Yes, it was. 7 years for a crime I never committed. No, that's it's a joke I'm fond of. It was 7 years is a long time doing that particular shift, and it's definitely hard on the family. I will qualify that by saying I've never been gifted such a great audience. The audience itself was loyal, smart, funny. So it was just one of those things. The hours were terrible, but the job was awesome.
And that's an interesting thing about audiences, isn't it? Because I've often heard the mid-dawn, and particularly on talk radio, described as companion radio. It's a very different audience to I assume, to the audience that you're speaking to now from midday.
It's a good distinction to make, because it is companion radio, and I was told that going in, and so it wasn't necessarily a style of radio I was used to. It is, to my mind, a very important social function that the radio station fulfills, because overnight radio is a social network, as viable as Facebook or any other that you want to mention, and it is a way for people who aren't, let's say, socially engaged at a great level, to be socially engaged with a community that really kind of coalesces around an overnight radio show and a host that they might like. So there's a world of characters. The phone lines were always open to people to call, and you could get through, albeit with a bit of a wait some nights, because the luxury of overnight radio and a 5.5 hour show is that you can really have a great conversation, a good conversation with people that wasn't time limited the way it is on a 3 hour show in afternoons, where it's essentially in half-hour blocks and you set up, knock them down, and then move on to the next thing. So, it allows you to get to know your audience extensively.
It's really a very personal medium, isn't it? I mean, the host is there and you're out there and you don't really know how many thousands of people you might be talking to. But for the person sitting at home with the radio in the background, that radio sometimes becomes a lifeline, and the host often becomes as if they're a friend.
There is that relationship. There definitely is, and you feel that you're friends too. You just gel with certain callers. You might not with others. But there is that community, as I say. You are invested in the welfare of people you speak to on a regular basis. You want to know if they've had a health scare, how that's panned out, if they're having some sort of issue with in their life, if they're troubled or if life's going well. As I said, it's a community where you become part of their life, they become part of yours, and you care for each other, but not in a face-to-face way.
You've had a very long career in radio. Is it something that, you started off in sort of local radio and sort of moved on to the FM stations and worked your way through there. Was that something that you always sought out? Was it a fascination for you before you went into the trade?
I'm a little bit embarrassed to say it wasn't, because I've met plenty of people in this caper who almost built their own radios and valve sets and could tell you the entire lineup of Eon FM in 1982 to 87. You know me as an obsessive person, but that's for aviation as much as anything. And, the things I thought I'd be doing, a strategic or defence analysis, or analyst, I should say. There was going to be a whole bunch of things that didn't include radio at all. And as it so happened, a mate and I, he was very driven, and he's still in radio, by the way. That's Julian Schiller. He certainly didn't ponder a 30-year career in radio either, and yet that's panned out. He's done more years in radio than me. So it just we got together, we bonded, we became a comedy duo, and radio was the avenue. Triple R was a great place to start. I did listen to Triple R, when I was a teenager, and it was open to the sort of stuff that we wanted to do. So we did a demo that didn't go very well with Stephen Walker, who was then the programming director, because he had 1,000,001 comedy shows, or so he said. As it turned out, that wasn't really true. However, what he wanted was a serial. We, being young and relatively naive, said, sure, no worries, we'll do a serial. We were writing 2,500 words a week, so 500 words per episode, that they went for about 7 or 8 minutes. And the serial that we ended up writing for the DGen went for 90 seconds and had 3 jokes a page. I kind of wish we'd started at that level.
Yeah.
Well, when I say we wrote it, we helped write certain episodes of it. So, but that's what, when you have the unlimited energy of youth and nothing holding you back.
And that would have been in the time of, the great comedy duo of that time, of course, was Martin Malloy, at least on radio, wasn't they? Were really dominating in the comedy space. So
my God.
That's really something that you would have had to sort of compete with.
Well, let's see, we started in about 93. Martin Malloy came along. They kind of really peaked a little bit later, like 95, I think, after the Late Show. People forget how enormous they were. They were networked around Australia. They were doing 2 hours between 4 and 6, and they were just two of the just giants, two brilliant comedians.
I still have great memories of that show, and I remember them pointing it out to John Laws a lot that, by the way, Lawsy, we're national. We're national. Yeah,
and I think they were outrating him. They were just colossal. And nobody could compete with them. You just couldn't. And they were the kind of benchmark, and you would hear the imitators. I remember imitating them. They cast a very long shadow. But, you listen back to some of their stuff and it was pure genius. Not all of it was, I'm going to be fair, but, God, you can't go past Mick Malloy ringing his mother on a birthday and her answering the phone, yes, Michael.
Oh, yes.
And Mick saying, Mum, I know I forgot your birthday, but I've got something very special for you. And then Mr. Methane belts out, happy birthday to you.
Oh, yes. I remember that. In fact, I was actually remember driving a bus one day and having that playing, and they were doing a Mr. Methane skit, and I remember an old lady tapping me on the shoulder as she got off and offering to report me to the company for playing such profanity in the bus.
Well, he's not to everyone's taste, I grant you.
No. Well, Tony, speaking of good radio characters, there's this guy, of course.
Mate, I'm the best, Darren. I learned from my uncle. He would always say to me, there is nothing that sticky tape cannot fix.
Very wise words from Guido Hatzis. Do you know that guy?
Yeah, I do know that guy. God help me. Yeah.
That's
Well,
a character
again,
that's kind of followed you, hasn't he? He's followed you from station to station.
Yes, that's true. Speaking of long shadows, and pops up on AW afternoons because, well, Tom Elliott helps it by saying up next Tony Moclair, and then there's a Guido grab that he plays after that. So,
Well, I can do that.
I come in there, start work tomorrow, but I do not do any dirty work, all right? That is what you will do.
I love that guy, the plumber, beautiful man. Yeah, that character couldn't have worked anywhere else but radio, Steve, because I'm not Greek. I'm 6 foot, but I'm not the character we sketched out, that Jules and I sketched out as Guido, who was 6'4", built like, the Acropolis, tan, Roman nose, all the rest of it. So that was a wonderful thing about radio, was the power of the imagination that you can create visually just with words. And that's why Guido worked, and it was much harder to translate into a live environment.
Do you reckon that sort of character would work these days, or any sort of ethnic character? I mean, the world has changed. Do you think radio has changed with it?
That's a thorny one, and it's hard to answer. What you have on social media is in relative terms, a small group. They can be 20, 30, even 500 people who are desperately unhappy and want to kill fun for other people, or have nothing
nothing better to do.
Well, nothing better to do, but they're kind of bereft of either family or a nourishing relationship or a purpose in life. So they do award themselves a status of people who police, and they're gatekeepers, and that's been pretty well established. So if I was doing Guido today, I'd be gone on charges of cultural appropriation, maybe, or a million other kind of sundry charges. So the weird thing was, in the whole history of doing Guido, when it was really hot, was that it wasn't Greek people who complained. I had one complaint from a Greek person, and it went like this, Steve. Yep. And this is no word of a lie. This guy comes up to me and goes, "Mate, do you do that character, that Gura Hetzis?" And I said, "Yes, yeah, I do. My name's Tony, and I do it. I only got one problem with him, mate." And I said, "What's that?" He goes, "I never met anybody who speaks like that." So,
what do you say to someone who says that to you?
You just say, "Okay, I take your point," and you keep walking. So there was, if I do a shopping centre appearance or whatever, it was mainly the target audience who were there. It was mainly Italians or Greeks or Maltese or Lebanese or whatever. And we always thought that what they loved, and it's a very kind of, if you want to call it a Mediterranean mindset, this, and you hear it in the plumber call, this, whereas you and I would be, it'd be great if I could have the plumbing job, that'd be lovely, and what time, and that's great, thank you for the opportunity. The whole kind of attitude of Guido was, well, you should be proud to employ me. It kind of flipped the script, and Anglos aren't like that. So,
well, I think it's a big difference between, like, when you and I were young and growing up in the 70s and 80s, let's say. I mean, humour was different. The ability to rib someone was, I think, was a little bit easier to do, and people sort of took it in that spirit. But I don't sense that it's the way these days. In fact, we were talking before about social media and how that's sort of come on. I have a theory, and I don't know what you think of this, Tony, but I think it's changed people's ability to communicate, and not for the better. I sort of feel that, even though you and I are in the business of communications all the time, it's very easy to get onto social media and quickly slam somebody and disappear, but people don't seem to be able to spell these days. They just don't seem to communicate as well as perhaps we once did.
No, I think that's true. It's also a very passive-aggressive way of getting back at somebody who you don't like, rather than confronting them face-to-face. You now, the other string to your bow is, if you have a serious grievance with somebody, is reputational destruction. And I don't think that existed before. You may have done that via a lawsuit, say, but these days you get on, if you can muster a mob quickly enough, it's savage. And nobody has come up with any kind of remedy to that, or any kind of what do you call it, firebreak, or a way of taking the sting out of a hate mob once it's formed on social media. And it's really nasty, and it's humanity at its worst. The irony being, and I'm old enough to remember, and you are too, the promise of the internet in the mid to late 80s was it was going to give us all the ability to communicate with everyone all over the globe, and it was going to usher in some kind of techno-utopia. Well, it's been far from that, and, it's that thing. You give somebody the chance to be an idiot, and they'll grab it with both hands. And that's, collectively speaking, that's social media at its worst.
It's disappointing, but I suppose, we can look at other things. One of the things that, for example, that's actually presented quite a challenge to radio, I think, and it's come about because of the internet, of course, is podcasting. Now, I know you've done some podcasting briefly for another network that you worked for one time, perhaps when that medium was in its infancy and perhaps not as well understood.
Yeah.
Do you think that presents a challenge to radio, or do you think they may have learnt now that it's something that they can use as an adjunct to their own product? How do you think radio copes with a disrupting influence like that?
Again, that is a great question. I'm looking at how Channel 9, the owners of 3AW, are looking at podcasts, and it's something they want announcers to do. So I'm currently talking about a podcast that I'll do eventually, and what that's about, I don't know. I still think, and I really hope, until some sort of breakthrough comes with technology, what has kept radio alive and given it its point of difference, and therefore its survival, is the fact that it's live and local, and it is unbeatable in that regard. I guess you can have Twitter, you can have Instagram, that sort of stuff, but to me, the radio, you get in your car and you turn on the radio, and if you want to know what's happening, you're not turning to Instagram in your car, you're turning to AW or the ABC or whatever it might be. We're how many years into social media? Possibly 10 or 15. Radio hasn't been displaced yet, at least not AW Talkback. You don't have Talkback on social media or online like we provide it. So I don't get any kind of sense of gloom, but then there was no sense of gloom on the Titanic in the 5 minutes before it hit the iceberg. So I don't want to speak too soon.
Yeah, well, I think it's a matter of radio just looking at that new technology. I often look at it, in the same way that perhaps taxi drivers might have once considered Uber drivers. They wouldn't have liked them coming in and muscling in on their turf, but these days they all seem to sort of work in together, and I think there's a place for podcasts and for radio. I'm talking to 3AW's Tony Moclair. You can find him from midday on 3AW here in Melbourne, and you've gone to the afternoon slot. As you mentioned at the start here, it's a different way of presenting the show. I have noticed that you have been a bit more forthright with opinion when you've been on that, obviously catering to a different audience. Has that been something to adjust to, and do you think that's been well received so far?
That's always a bit of a double-edged sword. I guess you don't know how an opinion is going to land. I think I had more latitude overnight, but I can't help expressing opinions on issues as I see it, and I really need to get this across because I have this all the time, always from left-leaning people, and there's this kind of condescending, I can't. So I guess you're just given talking points by the station, or you're told what to say. Nothing can be further from the truth. I don't have any contact on a day-to-day level with my programming director or the station boss, Stephen Beers, except for admin stuff or whatever. In terms of him coming to my office and tapping the newspaper saying, I want you to go really hard on this, and I want you to go the most kind of reactionary right-wing kind of point of view on this that you can. Do you understand? Oh, okay, I put away my copy of Das Kapital by Karl Marx into the desk where he doesn't see it. There's nothing like that at all. So what you hear is my kind of unvarnished opinion of things. If it's warranted on a given topic, that said, I'd prefer the show. I think it should be something of a change of mood from the shows that tackle the serious stuff like Tom and Jackie Felgate. We should be just a fun middle of the day show that kind of leaves the serious stuff to those to whom it's their bread and butter.
Well, just as we wrap up here, Tony, now I remember when coming on your show, and of course you and I are both into aviation, and talking about taboo topics, your one-time producer there, Bianca, now is she still on the scene? Because aviation was really a taboo subject. We often got stomped on a little bit, didn't we? We got in a bit of trouble.
Well, we did. I mean, not everybody is made for paradise, you know what I mean? Not everybody... I mean, there is none so blind as those who will not see the glory of aviation.
That's right.
And I've had to deal with that sort of stuff, and you have too. And it marks us. It's a cross that we bear. Strangely enough, I have followed Bianca to afternoons. She left the show about 2.5 years ago, and went with my fulsome best wishes, because overnights is hard. It's really hard. So she went to that show, and then lo and behold, I started presenting that show. So it's her bad luck or good fortune. Time will tell.
Has she taken you away and given you a stern talking to before each show before you go live? Or now, Tony, yes, we won't be talking about B-52s.
Some things on the show are non-negotiable. There will be a mention occasionally of aviation. There's nothing you can do about that.
Well, here on the Clear Signal, Tony, you can regard this as a safe space. You're welcome to come on here and talk about planes anytime you like.
You're validated.
Tony Moclair is the afternoon presenter on 3AW, as I mentioned. To make sure you check them out, 3aw.com.au. Tony, great to catch up, mate, and I really appreciate your time.
Best of luck, Steve. You call me anytime.
You're listening to The Clear Signal.
You know, there's that old saying about money and the way it makes the world go round, and, you know, sometimes that's a topic that can probably be robustly disputed. But in my humble opinion, it's not money at all. You know, the real thing that really makes the world go round and really keeps it real, as the saying goes, is coffee. And I'll be willing to bet wherever you're listening to the show right across Australia, there's a pretty well a better than even chance. I reckon you'd be doing that right now with a coffee in hand or somewhere nearby. And in more recent times, there's also been this concept that seems to have popped up, I suppose particularly here in Melbourne, of the so-called coffee culture. And there's so many ways you can get your coffee made too. I'd have to admit, here in the studio, though, it's basically your basic instant coffee, wipe with one. But I am picky about the brand. And boy, I tell you what, that's an expensive choice these days. But anyway, have you ever wondered what goes into making your favourite brew, and perhaps at your local cafe? And how do some get it right while others, well, frankly, just don't? And what goes into making sure those fancy espresso machines you see in your cafe are always up to the task? Well, my guest this week is a man who ponders such things on a daily basis. He's built up a great business supplying and repairing this vital equipment all around the place. He's the owner of Gippsland Coffee Services and the Gippsland Coffee Emporium. Darren Eastwood, welcome.
Good afternoon. It's good to be here.
It's great to have you with us, mate. Now, I should talk to our listeners, and I should say to our listeners that right off the top, you and I have known each other a long, long time. In fact, all of our lives, which is why I happen to know that although you do a great community service in helping people's coffee machines keep working and espresso machines and all that sort of stuff, but you weren't originally a coffee aficionado. You, in fact, were very firmly ensconced in the tea camp.
Yes, my father was very much anti-coffee, and certainly brainwashed me at a young age that anything coffee was horrible and disgusting. And so, yes, I never even really tried, or I did try Nescafe 43, but you can't really call that coffee.
And you see, I find this progress when you're saying stuff like that, because people ought to know that back when we were growing up, of course, you were a tea drinker, and of course I've always been in the coffee camp, so that's always been that point of difference. So it does my heart glad to hear you say things like that, mate. But I think going on, obviously time has gone on, but you did eventually find yourself in the coffee camp. But interestingly, with your background, you started off as a fitter and turner. I mean, it was nothing to do with the food service industry at all.
No. I did heavy industry, heavy engineering, anything to do with fitting and turning. The last paid role I had was working for the coal mine industry out in Latrobe Valley. And then, I had a friend of mine that was nagging me for at least 2 years to get into the coffee business, because there was definitely a void in Gippsland. That was also about the time that my wife and I, we bought a cafe in Leongatha, and she was running that. while I was still working full-time. And I eventually started looking to actually follow through on what my friend was suggesting all these years, and that was to start up my own coffee business. So I hung out with him for about 6 months, used up all my annual leave, all my sick leave, and spent all my weekends with him it's still engineering, but you got to learn the particulars of the different machines.
That's really the thing, isn't it? Like in a way, even though it's going from doing heavy industry and all that sort of stuff, moving into food service, the guts of an espresso machine, it's kind of right up your alley as an engineer. So tell us, with that in mind, let's talk about them. Everybody goes to their coffee shop, right? And they always see this big fancy looking espresso machine there, and it whirs and it whizzes and steam comes out all over the place. But what does it take to keep one of those working in good condition?
A coffee machine is pretty well foolproof because it has to be operated by all manner of people, whether that being a person that knows what they're doing versus someone who's coming in and being trained up. So they have to be very robust. There's a lot of aspects to making coffee that a lot of people don't appreciate. But as far as the workings of a coffee machine are concerned, doesn't matter what the outside of the machine looks like, they're all pretty much the same inside.
Would it be fair to say it's basically a big boiler? That's my understanding of it?
Yes. It's a boiler, 80% water, 20% steam. Depends on how many groups you have. You can have 1, 2, or 3 groups.
And when you say groups, is it groups or grips?
Groups, GROUP, groups. Portafilter and portafilter handle is one of the other names for it.
I've discovered in the very limited experience of trying to use one of those things, in fact, if you don't put those things into the machine properly and the pressure comes in, they can shoot right across the room and try and assassinate you. I've had that experience more than once, and now I'm not game enough to ever use one.
Oh dear, that's pretty extreme. It's not normally that bad. And in saying that, yes, there's a couple of factors that contribute to that. If you don't have where the group handle engages into the group head, if that's not cleaned properly, then the coffee build-up tends to act like little ball bearings and it doesn't engage properly. And when the pressure comes on, it unscrews itself and will launch itself out, yes.
Well, that's where a good cafe comes in. I can just go in and slam my $5 down and get my flat white and be safe.
Yes. Or these Melbourne people, they come into our country folk and say, I'll have a magic, please, and then expect us to not know what a magic is. But we're on top of that now.
Well, that's really interesting. Of course, you mentioned Leongatha, and for our interstate listeners, of course, we're recording here in Victoria, but that's down probably, about 120 kilometres sort of southeast of Melbourne in the Gippsland region, a beautiful part of the world. A really sort of good regional town in Leongatha where you are. The decision to set up a cafe would have been an interesting one for you, and also coming in and having to learn the coffee culture.
Yes, you can't be expected to be proficient at your work in repairing coffee machines if you don't drink coffee. So, yes, it was a very big step considering my background. It was a very big step to go from being able to actually taste the coffee, and as part of tuning the coffee machine and the grinder and making sure everything's working properly, yes, you have to taste the espresso. A lot of my customers don't drink coffee, believe it or not. But yes, I can taste the espresso and I can tell you where the grinder is, whether it's too coarse, too fine, where the dose is. And yeah, that's just a matter of learning, I guess, and persistence. But it's also to the point where I'm just now made me a coffee snob. I can go into some places, and if I know what the coffee is, I will then decide whether I'm even going to bother trying it or not. And my preferred coffee is just a straight espresso, or if the coffee shop knows what they're doing, I'll ask for a double ristretto. Ristretto being a sweeter pour of the espresso itself. So,
there's really lots to unpack. We're talking here with Darren Eastwood, the proprietor of Gippsland Coffee Services, right here on the Clear Signal. We'll be right back after this. You're here on the Clear Signal with Steve Visscher. Great to have you with us. We're talking with the proprietor of Gippsland Coffee Services down here in Victoria, Darren Eastwood, and we're talking about one of the finest topics one could ever consider, of course, which, of course, is coffee. Darren, before we went to that music track there, we were talking about, you were talking about ristretto and the coffee culture. Tell us about how difficult it was for you as a tea drinker, as an avowed tea drinker, to get used to drinking coffee in the first instance, and now get to the point where now you can pick the grind as you were talking about. That must have been a long process.
It was a matter of getting into the right frame of mind and determining that this is what I needed to do, and that to stop being so biased against coffee, I think, was the first step, and to actually give it a fair try. And then from there, yes, there was a lot of trial and error, and I had people that were teaching me at the time. Chris Bollard had been around town in Bayswater. He was been a very great mentor for me. Yeah, he sat down with me, and we literally made dozens of coffees and played around with the grind, and he taught me over the course of quite a while to learn the difference in the taste. That just doesn't go for espresso machines either. It's for filter coffee and all manner of coffee making.
Well, that's a very interesting point too, because, I spent a lot of time in the United States, and Americans love their coffee. But I'll tell you one thing, mate. Americans do a lot of things really well, but and don't hate me if you're an American listener, of course, but one thing I find Americans do really, really badly is coffee, and they have that awful watery drip filter stuff. I suppose if people go to a place like Starbucks, Darren, they may get a taste of what your average American would probably consider a premium coffee, but I always find that interesting too, because I don't actually really like that style of coffee myself.
No, I haven't had too much to do with Starbucks, but as far as I see, that all it is just coffee flavoured sugar. It's a dessert.
Yes, it's really strange. The last couple of times I've been over to the United States, I found that they're starting to come more around to the espresso idea, but it's still pretty widespread. It's few and far between, but maybe there's some hope that they're coming along.
Well, Melbourne's the coffee capital of the world, and everyone else is just slowly but surely picking up the game. But yeah, we as Victorians, we wear that badge with pride, I think. It's not much we can put our hand up for, but yeah, that's certainly one of the things.
So you talk about, customers coming down from Melbourne, and of course, they're coming into South Gippsland. They're sort of filtering their way down towards Wilson's Prom or whatever. I mean, where you are in South Gippsland in Leongatha is a good stopping point for a bit of a break. You would have had to have learned, as you mentioned earlier, all different ways of ordering, different styles. People's expectations can vary widely when it comes to the subject of coffee.
Oh, yeah. Gone are the days when it was just cappuccino or a latte. These days we've got all the different alternative milks, so you've got to be on board with that. They each have their own way of texturing if you're steaming them up. And, yeah, the whole different way of presenting them. Yesterday morning while I was working, I think I did more oat milk than I have full cream, and that would be the first time in ages it's been like that, which is funny.
And you talk about presentation too. I noticed that a lot of people now, particularly when you're sitting in some of the the laneway cafes in Melbourne, let's say, and you'll order. Now I'm a bit of a traditionalist. I like a flat white coffee, nothing really exciting. But sometimes it'll come and they'll draw nice little patterns, or you'll get a leaf or a tree or something drawn with the foam on the top. I mean, is that something that you guys have mastered down there in Leongatha, or is it is it really important? Do people have expectations around that?
Well, it's a matter of taking pride in your work. Every coffee you do, whether it be a takeaway coffee that you're even just going to put a lid on and no one's going to see, but every coffee you do, you use it as practice and you refine your methods. There's plenty of YouTube videos out there which people can learn, and then, well, being in the work that we are, then we can practice, and we certainly get plenty of opportunity to practice. There's not much you can do with a flat white, unfortunately, because it's the foam that makes the artwork, and some of the alternative milks don't really foam up too well either. I find it really difficult to do artwork with a soy, any type of soy. So
I find soy it's hard to do anything with, including drinking it, but that's just another subject.
Yeah.
Now I want you to solve a big debate for me that often goes on with certain friends of mine who are in the coffee culture. The difference between a latte and a flat white. I'm told it's about 1 millimetre of foam. What would your opinion be on that, Darren Eastwood from Gippsland Coffee Services?
Depends on your customer base to an extent. We tend to have the demographic in Leongatha is tending to be a little bit older. So when we have our clientele come in and they want a flat coffee, then we intentionally foam it, or when we steam it, we try very hard not to induce air into it to generate the foam. You've got to do it to a certain extent so that it doesn't squeal. And then as we're pouring it into the cup, we still use the back of a spoon to hold back any foam, so that when we do a flat white, it is dead flat. And that's predominantly how our customers like it. So next to no foam is how it goes out. But in saying that, some places have different clientele and how they like a really thin layer of foam. But if you come into our shop and ask for a flat white, you're going to get it flat. If you ask for a latte, then you generally get it 5 mil or so, 10 mil, depending on the size of the cup, of foam. And then cappuccino's really just a latte with chocolate sprinkled on top.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Like, it used to be the big treat was a cappuccino, wasn't it? Like, before the coffee culture really kicked in, if you were going to go and have something that wasn't your average Nescafe Blend 43 type of thing, it was going to be a cappuccino, and that was a treat. But, that's times have certainly changed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's now very much an outing, depending on your demographic. For some of our people, it's really the only interaction that they get in their day. Some of our elderly customers, they come in and it's just coming in and talking to the staff is a social outing for them as well. So there's a lot that goes into a cup of coffee. It's everything else. It's the atmosphere. It's the interplay with other people and just mixing it up and getting out of the house in some respects.
And that really comes down to the culture part of the coffee culture. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your businesses. In fact, you run two businesses, of course. You've got the repair business and servicing, but you've also got the cafe. It's no secret, of course, that we've come through some pretty tough times for the business world, but you and your wife, Veronica, actually took a very brave step right in the middle of the pandemic to rebrand your business. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, that came around as part of a very tough decision. Basically, the idea was just to go as small as I could, have it run as an espresso bar. We remodeled it. We stripped everything out, cleaned everything up, redid everything, the layout, whatever. And, slowly but surely just turned it around, and now it runs a lot easier. We don't have fried food, so we don't have a fryer. It's just a lot easier to run, a lot simpler, but we are still flat out.
Which is great. And I mean, the idea really in a nutshell then was taking it from your standard cafe, which it was known as Central Cafe, and move it into a specialist coffee emporium, as you call it. It's Gippsland Coffee Emporium now. So,
yes.
But doing that right in the middle of COVID, I mean, that was an admirable decision to make. There wouldn't have been many people making that decision. I mean, there were a lot of businesses closing down, let's face it, but that was, I always thought, a very brave decision.
Well, we're caught between a rock and a hard place. It's certainly moving forward, the prospects weren't good. Job opportunities at the time were null and void because of COVID. Income was going to be extremely difficult. We still had the business loan that we needed to pay off. So, it was just a matter of, we still have the shop. We're still, because of COVID, we're under a special rent agreement, and our landlords were very accommodating with everything that we were doing and very supportive. And it was one of those make or break decisions. It was go all in, or it was going to be game over. Yeah,
well, and as it turns out, it's been a great decision. As you say, it's running really well. With your servicing business, people should know, I mean, South Gippsland is a big area to cover, and you cover most of it. I mean, you do thousands of kilometres a week in your van going around making sure that, baristas all around that area are well serviced.
Yes. From Leongatha, I base around about a 1 hour's radius. Gets me to Cowes in the west, gets me to Traralgon in the east, Yarram in the south. But as far as reactive breakdowns are concerned, I generally try to keep within the hour's radius of Leongatha, and I can respond pretty quick.
Well, it's a very wonderful service you do. I couldn't imagine going to a town and not being able to get a coffee. That would be kind of like, a service station with no petrol, in my view. So, well done you, and keep it up. Yeah, pub with no beer. That's exactly right. If you drink beer, which of course, you and I don't. But anyway,
okay,
that's another topic. That's another topic for another day. Darren, if people want to look up and find you online, what's the best place to find you?
Gippslandcoffee.com.au. In that, you'll find all three businesses are tied in together.
Fantastic. Darren Eastwood, so good to have you on the show. Keep it up, mate, and make sure that coffee keeps flowing. It's very, very important.
Thanks very much. It's great to be here.
Well, that's everything we have for you on this week's edition of The Clear Signal. Thanks very much to Tony Moclair for joining us, and thanks also to Darren Eastwood from Gippsland Coffee Services. Great to have him along, and I'll tell you what, I think I'm looking at getting another instant coffee, probably much to his horror, going pretty shortly after we finish here. Thanks for being with us here in The Clear Signal. I'll be back next week. Until then, enjoy life, have fun, and stay safe.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.